These are common kind of tandem slash solo canoes in the lineup. I've been asked a lot by people, which way would you go? You know, what are the benefits? And so I want to just go through some of that. The Pearl right here is a newer boat from Northstar. It's 15'9". The Polaris has been in the line for a while, and it's 16'9". So the Polaris is a little bit longer. Just going through the dimensions, you're going to notice actually here that the Pearl is actually slightly lower in height at midship, but then the ends are much higher. It has that more traditional ends. So what that might mean if you're soloing these is you have a little more windage in the Pearl. But the Pearl is 2 inches of rocker, bow and stern. When we look at this Polaris, it's 2.5 up front and 1.5. So a lower profile on the ends in the Polaris, and then a little less rocker in the back. And what I think you'll notice, therefore, is a little less affected by the wind, and maybe a little straighter tracking. But when you get into this Pearl, there are some options that you have because it is perfectly symmetrical. So I'll show you here if you come in, Pax. The Pearl is really set up quite simply, kind of the cabin canoe. You'll notice it just has the carrying yoke. So because it's symmetrical, what's so great is this is the bow seat. So if I'm using it as a tandem, we'll have the stern paddler and the bow paddler. But when I paddle this solo, I can simply turn around and paddle it backward. And so it's very versatile because we don't have the thwart here. The Polaris next to it is a little longer, and sitting and going backward here is a little more prohibitive because it is a longer canoe. You're not quite trimmed out, and you have the support thwart right here, which is going to be in the way for you to paddle it backward. So the way that I solo in this Polaris, in particular this one, is I use a kneeling thwart, and that is a canted lowered bar that I can sit here and still face forward. And then we do have some people that will order with a center seat. In fact, I have a Polaris going out this summer that's going to have a center seat in the kneeling position. In that case, you can put a foot brace in it, you can kneel, or you can sit, but that boat would not have a carrying yoke. So today was kind of cool. We were out on the water with a client of mine. I didn't want to necessarily film them because we were doing some instruction and just wanted them to be able to focus on the boat, but I was able to make some observations of the two. He started out in the Polaris, and I think he found it a little bit easier to straight track and probably had a little more speed. And then on the way back down river, we were going into a headwind, and he paddled the Pearl backward. And we did need to put a little weight up front to trim out. He commented that it was more maneuverable, but with the wind, it was a little more subject to being pushed around by the wind, and we had to put some gear up front to trim it out. I think that he was able to go in a straighter line a little bit more easily in the Polaris, and I think he was kind of able to in and out of things a little bit more easily in the Pearl. Paddling position, I did ask him, did one feel better or the other? He did notice that this was a little bit wider because if you look closely at the Polaris here, it tumble homes back. So when you're in this kneeling position, you do lose a little bit of width of gunnel because it comes back in. So the Pearl also being a little bit wider by a ½ inch, 35 max width without tumble home. He had a little wider station when he was sitting backward in that station to paddle. Didn't say it affected one way or the other, but I think it was a little quicker for him to switch sides in the Polaris. I think really where the Pearl is neat is its versatility. Solo to tandem, moving water, flat water, definitely can spin this boat a little quicker, especially if you're willing to kind of get off the seat and move around the boat. Maybe you have a larger knee pad and you're able to move around a little bit more. Certainly something I can do with a kneeling thwart. Both boats really did well for him, accomplished the same thing. I probably would give the edge for him and his personal decision on the Polaris because he is going to be paddling in the sound, bigger open water. He wants low windage and better tracking. But I think if he lived here where he was on this river, he might choose the Pearl. The other thing that I really love about the Pearl I wanted to comment is when you go to tandem, like we did today with my son Paxton, who's filming, he was able to spin around easily and face me, and he was taking photos. It just gave a little bit more versatility for us to kind of hang out. So kind of the couple's boat, or in the case father's, fishing out of it. If you want to spin the other way, it's going to be a little easier for that. And that's why the Pearl is kind of affectionately called the cabin canoe. Very versatile. I think if you're going to be spending more time going from point A to point B, maybe loading up in gear, the longer length of the Pearl, a little more real estate for packing gear, the Polaris is going to be a better choice in that situation.
So as I head out into the Pearl here and turn it sideways, you'll see the bow is a little lifted. And for like this kind of conditions, it's kind of nice. It gives it a more maneuverable feel on a river like this. But if you're on a big boat and body of water, especially with a headwind, that would blow your bow off course. And so like I mentioned earlier, I would just put some weight. But the Pearl really spins. I mean, one reverse sweep stroke like that, and you're 180, a dog sitting in front of that carrying yoke, this boat would be perfectly balanced out. Speed acceleration was great, and the paddler station is really nice because it is a little bit lower there midship, and it's just a beautiful canoe on water. Now we're jumping into the Polaris, and here I put the boat on edge, and you can see as I sweep it around that stern stays in a little bit more. So it still easily spins, but there's an extra little sweep stroke to get it to go 180 that I didn't have to do in the Pearl. You can see that narrower station a little bit, and both of these are just really a joy to paddle as tandems that can be soloed. You can see also I'm just a little bit more balanced in that kneeling thwart position in terms of trim. But the cool part about the Pearl was that I could sit more easily, as you saw in the last video. And just you can see kind of more of a modern design here in terms of the profile of the canoe on the water.
All right, I just got back soloing these back-to-back, trying to kind of do the same strokes so that you guys can actually kind of see how they look on the water, but I wanted to share how they felt to me. That was really informative for me. I don't always do that. It's just jump back-to-back. What did I feel in the Polaris? First off, you notice that I kind of like the kneel. So the kneeling thwart was a little more comfortable for that. If you look at the Pearl, I have the sitting drops there, so it's a little lower. So I was able to do it, but I just didn't feel like I had the reach. So that was more of a setup issue. But I did notice the lower height of the boat around myself in the Pearl. I actually did notice that it was lower. And then in the Polaris, I definitely noticed that it was a little narrower and I had a little easier reach side to side. As far as straight lining, definitely the Polaris, there's a little wind out here. It just felt a little truer on track. And you probably can see in the video that I'm able to spin the Pearl a little bit more quickly. And so I'm able to do some of those little kind of variations of freestyle strokes a little bit more easily in the Pearl, whereas in the Polaris, when the wind caught it and I was doing that, I felt a little more resistance. Again, those aren't strokes you do all the time, but it did illustrate that the Polaris didn't quite spin as easy as the Pearl. So if you had any idea of doing like winding rivers, you'll notice that I'm able to just really throw the ends of the Pearl around a little bit more than the Polaris. I also, in the Pearl, paddling it backwards, I did feel further back. And so I think definitely if I was flat water paddling, I would need to really carry some ballast, like my Happy Paddling gear bag up front to balance out the Pearl. Whereas in the Polaris, without any gear, I felt more balanced. And so that could be accomplished, like you might consider even adding a kneeling thwart to the Pearl. I don't think it would get in the way of the stern paddler if you really were going to spend a lot of time soloing it. But for just casual soloing, paddling it backward was fine. Just be aware that you are going to have a little bit more of your bow up, and in headwinds, you're going to want to put some weight. In a situation where the Pearl might need weight, the Polaris might not. Again, I was able to move around my cockpit with the kneeling fort a little bit more easily, where I had to kind of get off the seat with the Pearl. But overall, they're both great for the purpose, great for a river like this, and you'll just have to really ask what you're going to be doing with the boat. Well, thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed seeing videos like this, please like and subscribe. We're going to do another future video where we put 2 adults in this and get the same type of comparison so you can see them out on the water that way. I hope you guys have a great spring. Happy paddling. We'll catch you on the next one.